Hello, everybody. My name is Ishan. I am the co-founder of a company called Pixie Labs here in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I've been in kind of product roles across startups, medium companies, and large companies like Apple and Amazon. And I'm here to talk about the question that I get asked the most. The question is, when choosing product roles, how should one think about kind of PM roles in small companies versus medium companies versus large companies? So let's get right into it. So when I was thinking about the talk today, I was thinking about what were the kind of top 3 questions people asked me, and this is definitely in the top 2 questions that people ask me a lot. So it's based on my personal experience. I'm going to give you a heads up that questions like these about how people should perceive careers is very nuanced. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'm going to give you a high-level framework about how I've experienced this as I've kind of evolved through my career. So first question, how do we go about defining these companies? So people say, are you in a small company or a medium company or a large company? So what has worked for me is a little bit of an inspiration from Peter Thiel's idea of 0 to 1. So the way I think about it is there are companies which are 0 to 1, there are ones which are 1 to 10, and there are ones which are 10 to 1,000 and beyond. And I'll kind of walk you through a few examples of companies that you know about, companies I've worked in, and kind of give you these high-level kind of pointers as to why I define them like so. All right, so companies that you know about. So 0 to 1 companies would be companies which are startups, which are in build mode. You've probably not heard about them. They're building to be the next Uber, the next Airbnb. So these are what you would call a pre-product market fit startup. The second would be these 1 to 10 companies. So companies like Airtable, Carta, Figma, Segment. These are companies which are growing like crazy, and their next destination is to go public or go IPO. And then the last is kind of companies which define what PMs are. So companies like Google, Uber, Facebook. These are massively kind of massive scale companies which have large kind of product management teams. So from my perspective, the content that I will be going through is based on my experience kind of working in teams, specifically on product across these 3 kind of cohorts of companies. So my experience right now, I'm the co-founder of a company called Pixie. It's a Series A kind of tier 1 investor-based company here in the Bay Area. Prior to that, I led kind of product functions in a company called Lattice, which is acquired by Apple, and then was at a company called Premise. So that's kind of where my 0 to 1 focus comes from. The 1 to 10 would be, I was part of a company called Kiva Systems right out of grad school in Boston. We ended up getting acquired by Amazon. So this is a post-product market fit company, which is scaling like crazy and went down the M&A route. And the last would be large kind of as they're now getting called, a large kind of big tech companies. So I've worked at Amazon and Apple through acquisitions. In Amazon, I would have to say I learned the most about what it really means to be a PM. And in Apple, I led kind of the product function for Siri's knowledge graph effort. So it was really good exposure to Apple. So to summarize 0 to 1 companies, a few points to think about. First, these are companies which are pre-product market fit. Second, you're probably going to be the first product hire. And the last is the goal of that person is to go hunt product market fit. So that's kind of what roughly being a product person in a 0 to 1 company looks like. There's a lot of nuance, as I said, but at a very high level, the pro is essentially ownership and accountability. You are responsible to go find product market fit, which is essentially the existential question of the company. The con is that responsibility is delegated too much. What I mean by that is in a pre-product market fit company, the founders are responsible to find product market fit. If they're delegating that kind of existential responsibility to a PM, just kind of have a nuanced understanding. So when I kind of mentor kind of PMs in the community and my friends, I keep telling them, if you're joining a 0 to 1 company, just understand why they're looking for a product person. So as an example, in Lattice, I joined as the first product market person, as the first product manager. And the specific goal there was find product market fit by doing product discovery for a set of founders who were academic and professors out of Stanford. So it was a very clear demarcation where, okay, as a product person, I have kind of ownership of that function. In previous kind of experiences, being the first product person actually ended up being a red herring. Like, do I have too much ownership? So that's kind of how I think about 0 to 1 companies. When thinking about 1 to 10 companies, these are companies like Airbnb and Airtable and Figma and Carta. These are post-product market fit companies going to IPO. So you would probably be a PM in a product function somewhere between kind of 5 to 20, 25 PMs. The goal there is to ship. The company is scaling. Your goal is to kind of ship and support that growth. So the huge pro there is just rapid growth. You can learn a lot. You can have a lot of impact. And the con that I keep kind of telling people is make sure you're joining a company where you have strong mentorship. If there is a strong product leader, whether they're the founders or the ones leading the product function, this is a great opportunity for you to learn. If you don't have that, it could get a little crazy because you essentially end up having kind of 5 to 10 kind of product people running in a bunch of directions, and there's no kind of leader kind of steering them in the right direction. So that's kind of how I think about 1 to 10. The last is kind of joining the proverbial holy grail of product management, kind of being a PM at a Google or an Uber or a Facebook or any kind of large companies in your regions. So if you're in kind of Ola in India or Gojek in Southeast Asia, the huge pro here is that the scale is immense. You're impacting tens or maybe hundreds of millions of users. So, but as from a function perspective, your responsibility to the company is to consolidate that scale and kind of launch new features, make sure you're growing from that really strong base. The con is you have to compromise on pace. The larger teams get, the slower you move. This is just how humans work. And the second is from an ownership. You're working with 20 to maybe hundreds of PMs, right? So that's kind of the trade-off there. So to summarize, 0 to 1, 1 to 10, and 10 to 1,000 and beyond. And I'm going to use this framework in the next kind of few sections. All right. So at least you have a good understanding of how I think about defining these companies. The next question I get asked is, all right, so now that I have these companies, which one should I pursue? The question I ask them is, what does product management mean to you? So in terms of your kind of idea of product management, what is really important is your North Star. Where do you want to go? And this is a really difficult and sometimes philosophical questions, but I tried to push myself, and I got a lot of help from my mentors who pushed me to think about, okay, like in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, where do you see yourself being? And that's kind of what I share with my friends and people that I mentor. So this next statement might seem a little bit provocative, but if you kind of push that idea, all right, I'm going to become a product manager in a 0 to 1 company, or a 1 to 10 company, or a 10 to 1,000 plus company, what am I going at? So here's a provocative idea. My learning, having worked in these different setups, is if you're really passionate about being a product manager in a 0 to 1 company, what you're really passionate about is eventually becoming a founder, not the sole founder, kind of essentially working with the teams and building products, teams, companies from the ground up. That's essentially what you're going at. Again, a little bit provocative, but just to push the boundary there. The next is if you're in a 1 to kind of 10 company, the kind of the ceiling is to be the head of product. Essentially, you're leading a product function in a company which is growing like crazy. There's two things here. You get to hire, you're leading a team, you are kind of driving the strategic vision, and you are the head of product. What I learned kind of the wrong way is a head of product doesn't mean that you are a VP of product. And I didn't care about titles first, but what that means is the company is not large enough to essentially for you to run an organization. And hopefully you do that as the company gets into the last bucket, which is a 10 to 1,000 plus case. Here, the North Star is essentially you end up becoming a VP of product. It is somewhat kind of brash to think about these titles, but essentially that's kind of what you're kind of marching towards, right? So this is how I force myself to figure out, okay, what am I really getting at? So do I want to be a founder eventually? Do I want to kind of continue to be really good at being head of product? Or do I want to essentially be a VP of product at some point? So that's kind of the question I ask. So from my perspective, kind of one direction is if you are the founder, you can either do it right now on your own, or you can learn the ropes by working in kind of scaling teams and then becoming a founder. Obviously, you can work in larger companies, and then you have to, it just takes a little bit longer. But if that's your kind of North Star, I always say either do it on your own right now if the timing is right, or gonna get experience. From my perspective, my North Star was trying to do something on my own. It took me a while to kind of get there for a bunch of reasons. So what I did was I worked in smaller and smaller companies to learn the ropes of every single function that I need to know. So that's kind of one route. The other is you want to kind of be a VP of product, have really kind of strategic ownership of a product in a large organization. I say there's two efficient ways to get there. One, join a large company, really like have a lot of impact and kind of grow. The other is join a company which could get in that cohort, join an Airtable, join a segment where these companies are on a roadmap to become one of these large companies, and then kind of get from there. What I tell people not to do is do not gamble on your career. Do not take a PM role in a company without thinking through these somewhat existential questions. Just gambling and joining a company because it kind of passed a few checks usually ends up hurting you in the long run because you are not really building to some sort of North Star. So try to come up with a framework. Maybe my approach is helpful in some regard. Ask these existential questions and don't throw your North Star in the trash can. Really use that to figure out which company to grow. All right, so that was my second question. Ask yourself what your North Star is. Now we get to the last question, which is now you have an understanding of the type of companies. You try to work on figuring out roughly where you want to be a couple of decades from now, maybe 5 years from now. And then how do I merge them together? All right, I have these kinds of companies. This is where I see my career going. All right, what do I do right now? So at this point, I ask people, and this is the question I ask myself, like, what does a PM really do? And to be very honest, I stumbled into product management kind of through a Brownian motion. I did not pursue a career of product management. I grew up in India, moved to the US, so I didn't know a lot about what PM as a function is, and I also kind of wasn't really opinionated about the title. I was more opinionated about the problem I want to work on. So kind of what a PM does is a question that you really need to ask yourself. What I have learned is what PMs do on a day-to-day basis is extremely specific to the industry, the type of company, the end user that you're solving for. And it really changes whether you're in Amazon or in Apple or in a startup or in a large company. So what are the unifying factors that I think kind of bind all kind of PMs together or people who want to become PMs? So what does kind of product management mean to me? The first is I really think kind of product managers are people who are really passionate about living between the market and the technology. And that market could be kind of enterprise customers or it could be end kind of consumers. But PMs essentially live in that gap, and they kind of are the link between those two words. And I'll walk you through what that means in different functions. So that was the number one thing that I thought about. All right, that's kind of something that's exciting. Like when I stumbled into product management, I essentially was an engineer who got pulled into a sales call, and I became an SE, and then I became a PM. I was merely taking technical concepts and mapping that to kind of customer pain points, and that became like a product management function. I've seen a lot of the best PMs really kind of bridging that gap and being really good at what they do. The second concept is this idea of being passionate about kind of influencing end user impact. So what I mean is kind of people who want to be PMs are deeply passionate about kind of putting a smile on the end customer's face, whether that's an end consumer or a kind of an enterprise buyer, that they're deeply passionate about that. And then as they have more kind of impact, they also want to claim ownership of that outcome. What that means is, I want to do more of this. I want to build a team. That could also mean, oh wow, this is great. Like I just had a huge impact on the bottom line, on the revenue of the company. What if like I did sales as well? What if I started my own company? So they're really kind of impact oriented. That's kind of the second thing that comes across. The last one is somewhat nuanced, and I kind of learned through my kind of career. So I'm like at year 8 or year 9 of my career. So a little bit of experience, but still a long way to go. What I realized is there's two kinds of people, and especially in kind of Silicon Valley and kind of tech companies. There are people who build and there are people who sell. And everybody else helps people who build and people who sell. And PMs are kind of in this gray zone. We don't really code, we don't really sell, but we impact and influence change by, wait for it, like two things: the power of your idea and the quality of your execution. So the great PMs that I learned from and I kind of saw them functioning, they were masters at building out their process of influencing change by these two things: the power of their ideas and the quality of their execution. So across industries, across sectors, across kind of phases of companies, these are the three things that I at least thought about. Okay, these are these common patterns here. There's probably a lot of different ways, and you probably are thinking of it differently, but this is kind of what helped for me. So now this is the third question. This is, I think, what kind of product managers do. And the question is, okay, what is the right team or company for me to work on? And for me personally, at every career, every kind of point of my career, I went through this map of what do I want to optimize for now? And for me, the path was always to essentially try to work in 0 to 1 companies as a founder. And at every phase, kind of what that pushed me to think about is what is most important to me. So currently, after kind of product roles at large companies and medium companies and a few small companies, along with my co-founder and my team, I started a company. And during that process, kind of the rationale was I was really, really passionate about kind of sitting between the market and the user. And the most value is go hunt product market fit. That kind of feeling of taking a technology and going out and solving real pain points and pretty much making a company, it was just really addictive. So that was by far the most important thing for me. The next is, as you get experience and as you have more impact, this idea of having ownership of that impact became more material to me, which is kind of somewhat of an artisan mentality, which is, all right, I'm influencing a lot of change. What if like we were a small team and you had a lot more ownership of that outcome instead of working in a large company? So that was the second thing. The last parameter you have to compromise on. So I had to. If I was working in Amazon or in Apple, the sheer scale of impact that you can have, it cannot be replicated. You're literally shipping features which impact hundreds of millions of users across the world. In a mid-stage company, especially in a small company, you're talking about tens or hundreds of customers, right? So having that impact is something that you have to compromise. So I always tell kind of people, like, if you're really passionate about having impact and the scale of impact matters to you, something like internet.org or WhatsApp, go work in that company. That's going to keep driving you. And then what you're optimizing for kind of varies between teams. So that's kind of what worked for me. Hopefully this talk was useful. It was a pretty dense kind of short conversation. But just keep in mind, when making these career decisions of joining a company as a product manager, deeply think about what is the type of team, what is your North Star, and then what does product management actually mean to you, and try to kind of link that and get to like, this is the right team. What has worked for me is using this framework over time. I've made some progress on my eventual North Star. What I would regret is making kind of not deliberate decisions and then losing 2 to 4 years. I've made that one decision, but that's kind of what I can encourage people. So hopefully this was helpful. A lot of nuance in here. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out at any point. All right, thank you.